So I'm the original gangster of vitamin D.
OG, original gangster. OG, original gangster. OG, original gangster.
In 2004, I wrote The Vitamin D Paradigm Shift, and I'll provide you a copy of that if you haven't already seen it. So right now, I'm going to use my own acronym for studying pharmacology. We're going to talk about function, administration, cautions, interactions, laboratory testing, and any other details on top of that. So that's the way that I describe and have structured my presentation on pharmacology. I call it the Facile Pharmacology acronym. And thanks again to all of the paid subscribers. Otherwise, I'd be doing something else. But because of your commitment, I likewise return that commitment by talking about new stuff or reviewing stuff that I've talked about before, in this case, a little bit of both. So let's talk about the pharmacology of vitamin D.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
I'm an old soul, got a funky sound. Gonna sing a song, turn the world around.
Good morning, everybody. Dr. Vasquez here, coming to you live on the 23rd of November. November is a very important month for several reasons. First of all, most of you aren't getting enough vitamin D from sunlight anymore, if you ever were. So as we transition from summer, let's say, to winter, a lot of you are going to become vitamin D deficient. So that's why I'm talking about vitamin D today. The other important thing that happened in November of 2025 is that we finally got our freaking floors finished, which means I could paint the baseboards, which means right now, even though I did that 3 days ago, it smells like the back end of Chernobyl in here. And that's why I have a fan on in the background. So if you hear some background noise from the fan, that's what it is. Because if it were not for that fan, I would probably be intoxicated on the remaining paint fumes, which hopefully will continue to evaporate over the next day or two. But as it is right now, it still smells like paint solvent. The other thing that happened in November of 2025 of major historical importance is that the United States is now completely insane under the chaos of Donald Trump. So over the last few months, just as an example, so Trump has attacked every body of importance in the United States, from teachers to nurses to attorneys to military. And within the last couple of months, under Trump, the United States has killed innocent people in international waters. So as a consequence of that, some politicians responded saying, hey, you can't do that, and the military shouldn't be complicit in carrying out illegal acts. So in response to that public service announcement, which should have been obvious to anybody, Trump said that those American politicians who created that announcement should be punished by death, because he said that they're traitors, and what was the other word, sedition, I think he used? That's a big word for Trump. Oh, so the United States is now just completely insane. So like I said recently, earlier this year I did a video saying, you know, international flexibility is the new stability. And that was just kind of a vague, abstract idea. It's like, wow, you know, things are getting kind of weird, but internationally. So you're better off if you have some flexibility. So I talked about travel, I talked about international bank accounts, I talked about learning another language, because let's say if you only speak English, but then you learn some Spanish, then you've got like a whole nother big chunk of the world available to you. If you only speak English, which English is a great language for many reasons, but you know, you're still limited to North America, not even North America, Canada, the United States, UK, New Zealand, Australia, a few countries in Africa, I think, speak only English. If that's where you want to live, that's great, but if you want to have other options, then you have to give yourself some flexibility. So like I was saying, you know, I did a conversation earlier this year talking about, oh, well, you might want some flexibility. And then it's like, oh, well, look what's happening in the United States. Things are getting worse. And it keeps getting worse to the point of utter insanity. And now by November of 2025, I think we will look back on this month as the month of America's departure from any beneficent reality. With Trump saying that American politicians who try to enforce normal law, like avoiding or disobeying illegal commands, now he's saying that that should be punishable. He is saying it, so you can't deny that he said it. He did say it. He wrote it. It's published. He said that they were traitors, guilty of sedition, and punishable by death. Absolutely fucking insane. So the way that that occurred to me this morning is that the United States is not simply, it's not collapsing through neglect, it's being dismantled. Every aspect of American life is being dismantled under Trump in 2025. In only 10 months. I mean, if this has happened within 10 months, I mean, the United States would be unrecognizable if it even could continue to exist for another 3 years under the same direction. But I don't think Trump will be in office 6 months from now. Unless he changes. I mean, he could always change course. He could always be better managed. But if he continues in his current trajectory, he won't be in office 6 months from now. I mean, I just don't see how it's possible. But I've been surprised before. I thought Americans would be more rebellious than they have been, starting with the pandemic, and they never did anything of any, international significance. A few protests here and there. Politicians don't care about your protests. Give me a break. All right, so now that I rambled on a little bit about politics, let's talk about vitamin D. So as I said, here we are in November, and this is a time when people are transitioning out of summer and exposure to sunlight and transitioning into winter, and so people are going to be more vitamin D deficient. So I will focus now on the pharmacology of vitamin D. Obviously, I've talked about vitamin D now for 21 years. Amazing. 21 years. So I'm the original gangster of vitamin D.
I ain't no superhero, I ain't no Marvel comic, but when it comes to game, I'm atomic and dropping it straight point blank and untwisted. No imagination needed, cause I lived it. This ain't no fucking joke, this shit is real to me. I'm Ice-T, O.G.
OG, original gangster.
So I'm the original gangster of vitamin D.
OG, original gangster. OG, original gangster. OG, original gangster.
In 2004, I wrote The Vitamin D Paradigm Shift, and I'll provide you a copy of that if you haven't already seen it. So right now, I'm going to use my own acronym for studying pharmacology. We're going to talk about function, administration, cautions, interactions, laboratory testing, and any other details on top of that. So that's the way that I describe and have structured my presentation on pharmacology. I call it the Facile Pharmacology acronym. And thanks again to all of the paid subscribers. Otherwise, I'd be doing something else. But because of your commitment, I likewise return that commitment by talking about new stuff or reviewing stuff that I've talked about before, in this case, a little bit of both. So let's talk about the pharmacology of vitamin D. Starting with functions, so you have a nuclear vitamin D receptor. You also have a membrane vitamin D receptor, especially in the brain. Everybody knows that vitamin D participates in calcium absorption and calcium balance to some extent. So let me give you an example of both of those. So in the gut, vitamin D promotes the absorption of calcium. However, when the body has sufficient calcium, then that lowers parathyroid hormone levels. And when parathyroid hormone levels are lower, that changes the intracellular, extracellular balance of calcium ions, and that has a huge impact on metabolism and inflammatory balance and things like that. So another way of saying that is that the quantitative difference or the quantitative impact that vitamin D has on calcium balance becomes a qualitative metabolic distinction, let's say, because as I already said, let me say it in reverse this time. When people are vitamin D deficient, they are not absorbing calcium as they should. Because of that, the body compensates by increasing the excretion of parathyroid hormone. When that happens, that's a kind of a desperate attempt by the body to maintain serum calcium levels. And that's where most people live most of the time, in a state of either, you could call it compensation, or you could call it reasonably decompensation, because it is a pathological state. When parathyroid hormone levels elevate to maintain serum calcium, that not only maintains the level of serum calcium, but it changes the intracellular balance of calcium as well to raise intracellular calcium levels. When that happens, that changes gene expression. So the balance of calcium, which is affected by many different things, one of the most important is vitamin D. The other really important thing is kind of systemic acid-base balance, pH, which you can measure. I've talked about this, and I've written about it for years, but I've talked about this before if you look at my videos on urine pH. That also changes calcium balance, and when we change calcium balance, we change the intracellular content of calcium. When we do that, that affects gene expression and inflammatory balance. So that's, one way of looking at vitamin D to understand its importance. Let's see. Let me just reintroduce something, because I did a separate introduction to this video, but I think now in the kind of cleaner version, I haven't explained why I have this exhaust fan on in the back, and that's because we got new floors finally, and that means I painted the baseboards, and that means it kind of smells like paint in here, so that's why I have a fan on in the background. Anyway, that's just some background information. Vitamin D, as I state here, also plays a role, I already kind of said this in a way, in immunomodulation. It's anti-inflammatory, counteracts intracellular hypercalcinosis. That's a phrase that I coined back in 2006. I published an article on that. And it's an important concept. Intracellular hypercalcinosis is a pathologic state, pathophysiologic state. Vitamin D improves and protects the brain. It has an antidepressant role, an anti-anxiety role, improves gut function barriers and the microbiome. Oh, and so here's what I added just a few days ago to give you another kind of perspective on vitamin D. So like the old way of looking at vitamin D is that, it just helps you absorb calcium and that makes your bones stronger. I mean, come on. Anybody who limits their conversation to that these days is just completely out of touch. Variously described, as I state here, almost 3,000 DNA binding sites for the vitamin D receptor. So vitamin D has a massive impact on human gene expression, a significant effect on the activity of more than 200 genes, which is at least 3%, and it's way more than that. But let's just say 3% of the human genome. So here's something I want to say. I'm not sure how accurate this is, but I'm just it's a little bit hearsay. But I think at one point I heard that, like, the difference between a human being and a chimpanzee was only like 1% of the genome or something like that. So so let's just assume, for the sake of conversation, maybe that's true. I'll have to look it up. But if only 1% of the genome is different between a human and a chimpanzee, then put that in perspective. If 3% of your genome is impacted or regulated by vitamin D, I mean, that's just huge. I mean, look at the difference between you and a chimpanzee. For some humans, it's a huge difference. So anyway, moving on from that, administration. Yeah, so for kids, and I said this back in the article back in 2004. A really important article was published on The Lancet. This was a life-changing, paradigm-shifting article published on The Lancet by Hipponen and his or her group from Sweden, I believe. This was a 30-year study with more than 10,000 kids, and they gave those kids, and they were all they were infants. I describe them here as children, but more accurately, they were infants, less than 1 year of age. And they got 2,000 international units of vitamin D and had I think it was a 78% reduction in type 1 diabetes. For adults, we could typically use 4,000 to 10,000 international units, assuming that they don't have sarcoidosis, tuberculosis, Crohn's disease, or they're not taking hydrochlorothiazide. So those are all risk factors for developing hypercalcemia. I've discussed that before in my review article that I'll provide you access to. Interactions, again, interactions with drugs and disease. So sarcoidosis, tuberculosis, and Crohn's disease, those are called granulomatous diseases. Some types of leukemia, lymphoma, should also be on that list. Granulomatous diseases increase the risk for developing hypercalcemia. So does hydrochlorothiazide. I've only seen that in one patient, but it was enough to make me concerned. Deficiency of vitamin D is promoted by inflammation, infection, steroids, anti-seizure drugs, and magnesium deficiency. So a lot of people are deficient in magnesium, usually about 70% of the population, and that's even by some kind of loose criteria. The conversation there is that you have to have magnesium in order to properly metabolize vitamin D, but you also have to have vitamin D to properly absorb magnesium. So obviously that can result in a vicious cycle. Lab tests monitor for hypercalcemia every once in a while. 25-hydroxy vitamin D3 is the test for measuring vitamin D levels, and we want that optimized in most people between 50 and 90 nanograms per milliliter. Again, that's for most people who don't meet some of our concerns and contraindications listed above. A few other comments. This should be routine use. No controversy here. No controversy for anybody who can actually read, unless you're one of the 16,000 people in the Endocrine Society, because the Endocrine Society, as a professional organization, mostly of physicians and endocrinologists, they can't figure out what the fuck to do with vitamin D. And they state in their 2024 guidelines that vitamin D is such a confusing topic, we shouldn't even do the lab test for it, because we don't know how to interpret the lab tests. That is from a professional organization with 16,000 members, and in 2024, which was a solid 23 years, 20 years is what I should have said. That was a solid 20 years after I wrote the vitamin D paradigm. And now they're saying, oh, well, we don't know how to measure vitamin D levels, and if we measured them, we wouldn't know how to interpret them. And even if we could interpret them, we wouldn't know what to do with them. That is the epitome of medical stupidity for strategic purposes. And I'll show you this. I'll show you why on one of the upcoming slides. In fact, I'll show it to you on this slide. So this is a slide I made back in 2021. The constellation of vitamin D impact on inflammation, hypercoagulation, and immunomodulation. So in one image, conceptual image obviously, this explains to you why the medical profession can't fucking figure out vitamin D to save their fucking lives, right? They can't figure it out. They fuck up the research. Every commentary in a big journal like in JAMA or something like that is going to say, well, we don't know what to do about vitamin D. It's controversial. It's controversial because they publish crap and they don't know how to read. They don't know how to read, period, let alone read research to any level of detail. But what I've shown you in this diagram, which is excerpted from one of my videos, so if you want to see the context for this conversation, look on my blog for the vitamin D gold mine, and you'll see where this came from. I think this was video number 5. So this image, as I already started to say, this explains the importance of vitamin D. And when we understand the importance of vitamin D, you'll also therefore understand why the medical profession has to bullshit every conversation about vitamin D, because vitamin D is so important for the human body that if people had adequate vitamin D, they wouldn't need so many anti-inflammatory drugs, analgesic drugs, anti-anxiety drugs, antidepressant drugs, antihypertensive drugs, anti-cancer drugs. I mean, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar drug market that is sustained by keeping the population deficient in vitamin D. And so that's why they can never understand it. The Endocrine Society says, well, we don't know how to test for vitamin D deficiency, and even if we knew how to test for it, we wouldn't know how to treat it. Well, look, I wrote the vitamin D paradigm shift in 2004. From start to finish, I was invited by the journal to write the article. From start to finish, I wrote that whole article in 10 days. Without any support. It's not like I was in some academic center, with a bunch of faculty and staff collaborating on this document. No, I wrote the damn thing in 10 days. Gil Manso, here's the other thing. So this was before I went to medical school. I went to medical school starting in 2006. I wrote this article in 2004. So in order for this article to qualify for continuing medical education, they said I had to have a medical doctor as a co-author. Well, so I got Gil Manso to sign off on it. Gil Manso and I worked together in the same office for about 6 years. It was his office, and I'm forever grateful that he let me work with him. He was a good doctor, a lot of experience, some radical ideas at times, and he helped me immensely in my life for getting into medical school and all these kinds of things. So anyway, he said, yeah, I'll sign my name to it. But he didn't do anything. John Cannell, literally at the last minute. So like I said, I wrote the whole thing within about 10 days. After I wrote it, I sent it to John Cannell, who's a medical doctor. I think he's a psychiatrist. And he's the president of the Vitamin D Council. So he's a vitamin D expert. So I sent it to him. I said, hey, take a look at it. He said, well, you didn't talk about diabetes and hypertension. And I said, no, I ran out of time. I said I had to do the whole damn thing in 10 days. So he said, I'll write the 2 paragraphs on vitamin D and hypertension and diabetes. So that's what he did. And the other thing that he did, I wanted to push for a more radical, higher level for vitamin D optimization. He said, no, he said, if you're too progressive with this, people will reject it because they're not ready for it. He said, you can be right, but you also have to write something that, the population can accept with this current level of knowledge and ignorance. So I was like, okay, I'll compromise. So I think I wanted to say the optimal range should be 50, which is what I have said since then. But I think we compromised at the time and we just said 45. We'll look at that in just a moment. Anyway, going back to this diagram before I move on. Vitamin D impacts, and in a certain sense, we could say controls 3% of the human genome. So it's of major importance. Because of that, when people are vitamin D deficient, which is the reality for 70% of the human population, let's say, they're chronically dysfunctional and sick. And for that reason, they are a profit center for the medical drug cartel. And for that reason, the medical drug cartel wants to protect its market by keeping people vitamin D deficient. So I'm going to read everything on the page here. So vitamin D has an important impact on controlling inflammation, coagulation, metabolism, mitochondria, therefore obesity, insulin resistance, diabetes, cellular defense against infections, defense in terms of barriers as well. I'll show you that on the next page. The elaboration of certain antimicrobial proteins. Also, again, immune balance. So immunity and inflammation are obviously connected, but they're obviously different as well. So we can reasonably state for the past 21 years, we can state that vitamin D has an anti-inflammatory effect. That's true, but it also affects immune balance, and that's connected to but different from inflammation. So that's why I say here immune tolerance. As I stated before, vitamin D also plays a role in the deficiency or synergy with other nutrients such as magnesium. Apparently magnesium, apparently also selenium, and I would also state probably, I think we'll eventually see, I think eventually the research will show that vitamin D plays a role in the metabolism of lithium as well. Vitamin D impacts the microbiome in a way that's actually quite interesting. Maybe I'll talk about that in just a moment before I get off this page. Psychosocial, again, when people are vitamin D deficient, they become more depressed and more anxious. Chemical and metal toxicity in this exact moment, I don't know what I was thinking when I wrote that, other than to just kind of claim perhaps that vitamin D, through its neuroprotective and anti-inflammatory roles, would kind of indirectly support a person against the toxicity of chemicals and metals. Messengers and hormones, as I stated before, intracellular calcium is considered, it's a classic example of a second messenger. One that actually promotes disease, dysfunction, cancer, inflammation, insulin resistance, hypertension. So when we optimize vitamin D status, we're also pushing in the direction of optimizing intracellular calcium balance. Obviously other things are at play there as well. And as I already said, neuroinflammation is a component of many different problems: anxiety, depression, addiction, alcoholism, depression and anxiety, but also food intake and metabolic balance as specifically related to diabetes, obesity, and insulin resistance. So again, with vitamin D, we can control to some extent neuroinflammation, or we can modulate it, and that has effects throughout the body. So again, the more you appreciate the value and the roles of vitamin D, the more you'll appreciate why the medical profession wants to be ignorant of these topics, because they don't want to give you an inexpensive, unpatentable, uncontrollable option that makes your entire health better. And that's before, as I show you on this page, and that's before we even talk about the amazing impact of vitamin D against acute viral infections, especially COVID. So, as I showed you here in this slide, this was back in 2021, I think. Yeah, 2021. Vitamin D has a remarkable impact in improving inflammatory balance, immune balance, barrier defense against infections, and immune function in general, and also recovery from infectious diseases. So when you talk about an infectious disease, like I state here, and this is the model that I created back in 2014 when I wrote the book on it, Antiviral Nutrition, any given infection has at least four main components, and you're looking at them here. Acquisition, replication, immunonutrition, or immune function per se, and cellular impact, systemic impact, and recovery from the infection. And vitamin D plays a major role in improving all of those. That's why in the clinical trials using vitamin D, we saw 70 to 80% literal salvation of these acute COVID patients. Well, what's the medical profession going to do in response to such a miraculous and inexpensive benefit? They are going to, of course, blacklist vitamin D. I'll show you that in just a moment. So let me go back one aspect. So here's the vitamin D paradigm shift that I wrote back in 2004. I'll provide you a copy of that. Here's the optimal range that I published in 2011. Again, pushing back up to at least 50 or at least 125 nanomoles per liter. I need to check that and make sure that's correct. So here, this was in 2021, more or less, at the end of 2020. This is when I wrote this, or kind of constructed this infographic on the optimal serum 25-hydroxy vitamin D level. Again, starting at 50 nanograms per milliliter, which again, confirming, is 125 nanomoles per liter. I have to look around my camera just to make sure I'm reading that correctly. I'll provide you these images on the website. So again, 2020, 2021, I wrote a few articles. You can get this one online for free. Vitamin D pharmacology infographic. I'm going to show you these graphics in just a moment. Physiologic dosing, which means daily or weekly dosing, versus bolus dosing, which is what the medical profession wants to do. So let's see what this shows us. So this is what you would expect. With physiologic dosing of vitamin D, 5,000 international units per day, you get a gradual increase in the active, biologically important form of vitamin D, which is 25-hydroxy vitamin D. Some of you will disagree with what I just said because you don't know and you don't understand the pharmacology of vitamin D. Because what I just said is the reverse of what most people are taught about vitamin D. Everybody is taught that the active form of vitamin D is 125 dihydroxy vitamin D3, and that is not correct.